I am Reverend Michelle Scott-Huffman. I have a name tag now. I got it after 3 years. Not because no one would make me one, but because I never could remember to ask for one. So my pronouns are she and her, and I'm the minister here at First UU, and excited to be back with you today. I spent some time with UUs from all over the place in Portland, Oregon this past week, and really just enjoyed that time and enjoyed being, for my first time ever, at a national UU gathering. So y'all are kind of cool. You're connected people who are kind of cool in other places. So for the last couple of years, we've been participating in a wonderful themed ministry program called Soul Matters. And I'm sure most of you have noticed that we have often a monthly theme, and that the Sunday services weave variations of that theme into a tapestry of exploration with many voices, viewpoints, and particularities. We're able to carry this theme into our other faith formation spaces as well, such as adult, youth, and intergenerational RE after the services, UU connections, virtual front porch conversations with families, and of course, Soul Matters small groups, which one member has named as one of the most important endeavors in her life right now. In addition to focusing our conversations in a way that allow us to go much deeper with a particular theme, Soul Matters has helped us to be connected to dozens of other congregations that are immersed in Soul Matters themes by nature of learning about the same things at the same time, and as the opportunity arises to be in conversation with others, as I got to be last week, and Dacia and AJ as well, attending virtually. In much the same way that our choir takes a break over the summer, and in some places whole UU churches take a break for the summer, as I believe this one did in days past, the Soul Matters cycle also has a break. So this year we've decided to enter into this break time with great intention, devoting one Sunday during July and August to each principle. So the 7 principles that we're already familiar with, and the 8th principle, which is a conversation going on in UU churches all over the place, a new principle that speaks to racial justice as a priority within our congregations. And then on the last Sunday of August, we'll come back around to the idea of covenant. And again, imagine together how and who we hope to be as a church and as a community of love and care, and what kind of relationships we need with one another in order to live into the principles that we say we affirm and promote. So the principles themselves have been through several iterations over time. An early forerunner, not the only one, but one of them, was the Universalist Declaration of Social Principles, drafted by Clarence Skinner in 1917, which was a list very much centered on a Christian understanding of God, Jesus, and salvation, albeit an understanding that more Orthodox Christians wouldn't have recognized and certainly didn't approve of. After the 1961 consolidation of the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church in America, member congregations of the new Unitarian Universalist Association, as well as individual Unitarian Universalists, debated the source of religious authority, resulting in the source statement found in the Principles and Sources section in the UUA bylaws. The statement, passed in 1961 and amended in 1985, set forth the sources of our living tradition, the ones that we see back here and more. As early as the 1930s, Universalists spoke outwardly of the need for what they called a bond of fellowship. What is it, after all, that holds a bunch of heretics together in the same way that a creed holds other religious peoples together? Is a question that we're still asking nearly a century later. What is it that holds us together when we're a liberal religious community with no dogma or doctrine to keep us on a prescribed path, and no creeds or affirmations of any one faith or any faith at all necessarily to be a part of the community. And yet, we keep showing up here in a church on Sunday morning to encourage one another on to spiritual or at least ethical growth. In the UU Tapestry of Faith curriculum, Faith Like a River, Jackie Clement and Allison Cornish write, Unitarian Universalists share this with all faiths. We hold high ideals and principles, and yet struggle to match our actions to our vision. Even as we honor our birthright as a community of heretics and celebrate our spiritual ancestors who followed their hearts and consciences to new truths, we sometimes settle, if uneasily or unconsciously, into a position that might be taken as orthodoxy in its original meaning, right belief. Liberal practitioners of most any religion would likely prefer orthopraxy, or right practice, to right belief, appealing to religious practice for transformation, justice, peace, and lived expression of love. But we all know that if you put two UUs in a room together, we will surely spend much of our time debating what is right, who gets to decide, and if there is such a thing, having a robust critique of anyone who has dared to try and answer the question in the past. And that's one of the most beautiful parts of Unitarian Universalism, that we don't check our brains at the door, but we bring them in. We put them to work, wrestling with ideas, testing theories, and discerning how to put flesh on those ideas to create a better world. The 7 principles that we covenant to affirm and promote offer us a framework to hold, shape, and even challenge our intellectual assent, our spiritual practice, and our social action. Warren Ross comments that in the premise and the promise, to an astonishing extent, today's principles and purposes have won a lasting place in Unitarian Universalist hearts and have been woven intimately into the fabric of our denominational life. That being the case, each of these discussions of the principles over the next several weeks will offer a lens through which a person sees the principle, helping them to determine its meaning for their own life in particular, and for our life together as a congregation. I'm happy to say that we'll hear from many voices in the weeks ahead. And I hope that if you have a particular passion for one of our principles, that you'll share that information so that it might be incorporated into a Sunday service as well. I'm glad to get to be the one to share the first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Or as it says in the kids' version, every person is important. It sounds pretty simple, really, but I guess it's far more complicated in its lived application. Because I often find myself in the midst of a meeting or a gathering in which we're robustly debating ideas, saying something like, that darn first principle. That's not the word I usually use, but something to that effect, because it's easy to get carried away with the tenacity of our beliefs and our hope for justice, and to demonize other people, to see other people who disagree with us as less than human. And sometimes, even when we're talking about the most deeply held fundamental ideas of our faith, we too can go to that place where the person who's the object of our conversation no longer has inherent worth and dignity, or at least we're not speaking as if they do. I mean, if I'm honest, it's super easy for me to talk incessantly, sometimes even shout or chant at a rally or a protest about the inherent worth and dignity of every single person. What about the inherent worth and dignity of the people I think are ignoring the inherent worth and dignity of the people I care about? they surely don't count, right? I mean, there's like an exculpatory clause that releases me from affirming and promoting their inherent worth and dignity, right? Because, you know, an eye for an eye, says the lex talionis, or the law of retaliation. But then there's that quote, often probably misattributed to Mohandas Gandhi, that says, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. To assert that each person's worth and dignity is inherent suggests that we are fundamentally good. Humanity is good. That goodness is our default, and that everything we've learned that goes against that goes against our very nature and turns us into something that is not our fullest and best selves. And it also suggests that when we are lost in something less than our best selves, that we can be found and made whole. Inherent worth and dignity is a foundation for equity, egalitarianism, and restorative justice. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the three Abrahamic religions, all recognize the concept of imago Dei, which is Latin for image of God, the spark of divinity that exists in every human that suggests that each and every one of us is valuable beyond measure. In humanism, perhaps it's the potential good that lies in each person to act on behalf of a greater good. If it is possible for any of us, is it not then possible for all of us to lean into that potential? Inherent worth and dignity serves as the foundation for the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And even though we know that all men didn't mean all men when it was written, and it certainly didn't mean women, and it absolutely didn't mean people who exist outside the gender binary, the power in these words is that they speak a truth that goes beyond their initial intent. They are ever expansive and aspirational. And so more and more, even though in this particular time and place, it doesn't feel like it, the arc of equality keeps bending toward further and further inclusion. It was a Universalist American poet, Charles Markham, who wrote the famous epigram Outwitted in 1915, playfully acknowledging that when the intent of one person is to shut others out, another is able to draw a circle wider and pull more in. Markham wrote, "He drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in." This, I believe, is what Unitarian Universalism was first designed to do, to stand up to exclusionary claims about God and humanity, and to say that divinity or sacred presence or great mystery or whatever it is to you is much bigger than any one religion or system can contain. And that no matter what system we're living under or in, all of humanity is beloved and worthy. Every person of infinite value. Again, understanding that even the founders of our movement didn't understand the fullness of the word every. Even so, I think this is still what Unitarian Universalism is designed to do, to draw the circle wider and wider, and to continue making space until the space we all take up together is sacred simply because it holds us all. So what does it mean for us to affirm the first principle? I'm thankful for the sages of this church, of which there are many, for all the ways that they teach me and model these principles for us. Doris Ewing feels deeply about the need for us to live into our first principle. She shared with me these thoughts about it. Inherent worth and dignity mean that it is something a person cannot lose regardless of what they do. We do not get to judge who is worthy. This principle is about how I choose to treat other people regardless of who they are or what they do. We must approach everyone in the spirit of love with compassion and respect, even though their choices and values may be different from ours. We must have empathy, both for marginalized and oppressed groups and for those with more power and privilege. And if our principle is to mean anything, it must include everybody. That's a tall order. And that's not it. We're in covenant with other UUs to both affirm and promote our principles. So then what might it mean to promote the idea that every human has inherent worth and dignity? I turn to Doris again, who shares, when challenging someone's words or values, we must speak with kindness in a way that does not make them feel devalued. Serving others does not mean making them more like us. If we really believe our first principle, we must act to assure that everyone has food, shelter, and other basic necessities. We must speak out against injustice and oppression wherever it occurs, even when it's right under our nose, in our own space. And in our advocacy for justice, we must not depersonalize or objectify others as less worthy of our respect. And in affirming and promoting the first principle, we continue to affirm the inherent dignity of humanity, while recognizing that some people are acting outside the bounds of behavior that affirm the dignity of others. And we can maintain our boundaries. The first principle does not ask us to accept destructive behavior. Doris points out that Jesus said, turn the other cheek. And I would argue that that requires some context to understand. But the Dalai Lama tells us to forgive, but not forget. We have a responsibility to protect ourselves, our church, and our society from those that intend harm, all the while somehow drawing the circle wider. I am personally glad that the first principle is the first principle, because I think it's a doorway to all the rest. I'm not sure that we can work for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations without the foundation that says that every human being has inherent worth and dignity. I know that we can't accept one another and encourage one another to spiritual growth without that fundamental understanding of our equality, of our being human together. I don't know how we have a free and responsible search for truth and meaning if we think that our truth and meaning is inherently better because our worth and dignity are inherently better than the next person. I don't know how democracy works without the inherent worth and dignity of every person, or the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And I don't know how we respect the interdependent web of all existence if we can't first see our own species in a way that says every one of these beautiful beings have inherent worth and dignity. It's a doorway to the rest of our principles, a doorway to the community when we come inside these walls, and it's a doorway to the world out there, and a way of seeing that helps us live up to our own truest and best selves. May it be so today and every day. Blessed be, and amen.